Alrighty, so it is time for us to look at the positional line with c3, which looks like this. So we check out our favorite horses, then we check out e5, then we kick the knight, then we go b5, knight d5, bishop e7, tuck tuck, and c3 is the topic of discussion for now. C4 is going to be the next chapter. So the point of c3 is to facilitate the rerouting of the knight toward the desired d5 square without creating friction between these two pawns by playing c4, or without making the d4 square a potential weakness. So c3 is definitely the shyest or the most positional, I think I should say, of the positional lines. We castle knight c2, and this is where opening theory branches into two big avenues. One of them is bishop g5 that says, I'm happy to allow a4, go for your life. And the other one is rook b8, our chosen method, which is that we're not allowing a4, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, we very much deny a4, as capturing on a4 is going to allow us pressure against the b2 pawn. Nonetheless, a4 is a very important variation, which we shall discuss. But for now, we are going to focus on first two bishop moves, bishop e2 and bishop d3. And after that, we are going to conclude the chapter with the, funnily enough, symmetrical two pawn moves on either wings, a4 and h4. But for now, let's begin with bishop e2, cranking up the positional even more. So with this, white simply wants to complete development, castles, knight b4 or e3, queen usually goes to d3. No easy targets for us to bite into, but also white's setup is very unambitious, at least for the time being. All they want is just to control d5 as firmly as possible, and then they will take it from there. This is what we do. We go bishop g5. Now, most typically h4 is the move, but castles is a very big sideline that we need to look at. Bishop e6, this is a piece formation in the vast majority of lines against c3, one bishop on g5, the other one on e6. And now we have got variations. This is going to be my go-to phrase a lot in this line. So queen d3 is the main line, knight e3 and knight b4 are both moves that we need to look at. If knight ce3, we go knight e7, challenging the d5 knight. Queen d3, knight takes, and we play here a little pawn move that we are going to rely on a lot in this setup, and that is g6. It really, well and truly, is a multifunction move. It opens up the back rank, which for the time being is not that important, but later on it might become handy. It supports the f5 break. It allows the bishop to come back if need be. Sometimes king g7, h5, h4, rook h8 can be a theme. So just an overall good, handy, logical move. Now, I will probably say it more than once in this chapter, but this first time is definitely one you would like to remember at this idea. f5 is typically not a move that we are looking to carry out in a rush, because very often it can lead to catastrophic consequences, like white now dominates the light squared color complex, and we are very badly lacking play. And worse still would be something like, let's say queen d7, take, bishop e4, queen e4, where our position maybe hold the ball if you feed it to the engine, but optically it looks as bad as a Sveshnikov can. White has got the complete light square blockade, d5 knight. Our bishop on g5 is not exactly an exciting piece. Try to avoid this. Hence, our move is g6. And yeah, this is going to guarantee us a safe and happy position. And if a4, I'm going to show you here a game by Nihal Sarin where Nihal took on a4, which is the idea when the rook is on b8. They played knight b4, queen b6. Knight takes, rook a8. And now b2 is on. Queen b5, take, and bishop b3. And this move is very annoying because bishop a4 is not playable. on account of bishop c4, hitting rook and knight. That's an ouchie. Rook d1 is not playable because we're covering that as well. And so white is finding it not so simple to disentangle from this mess. And we are doing perfectly fine here. Right, so that was knight ce3. The other knight move that you would like to know is knight cb4. Trading a pair of knights, hitting a6, a very typical operation in the Sveshnikov. We respond with queen c8, defending both c6 and a6 whilst retaining the tension. And now again, a plethora of moves can be thrown at us. Let's start with knight c6. We take. Knight b4, we take. Typically, as you know already from previous variations, when it comes to us losing some pawns on the queen side and us winning pawns in the center, we're typically happy campers. Knight a6, rook b6, and yeah, the best white has is to hunt down the e6 bishop, but we know that we are big fans of central pawns over wing pawns. E4 is going to be played, and then the dark squared bishop will be like fish in water. We're definitely not worse there, and I really like our kingside attacking prospects, in particular associated with the f-file attack and the f2 pawn being a very, very delish target right there. Right, so after queen c8, knight takes c6, I don't think is a sensible choice. Queen d3 fits the bill much more so. Knight takes b4 is our move, and now after cb, we are going to trade, and we are going to infiltrate. This is a typical theme that when we trade this bishop for knight, we usually would like to find something extra beyond that, because typically this bishop is a little bit more useful in these structures than this one, as this has targets and this one on g5 doesn't. That being said, there is a very important idea that sometimes we do get to carry out. If we manage to relocate the bishop on b6, then typically we are doing really, really well. But since here that it doesn't appear to be a feasible option, instead we go for this queen c2 penetration, hitting b2, e2 simultaneously. And yeah, now the whole entire queen side is going to evaporate, or at least the majority of it. And as luck would have it, that's the announcer's curse, or the presenter's curse. Here we are. That bishop does come around to b6, and in fact, that guarantees black a lot of counterplay. F2 hanging, a1 hanging. The rest of the line is completely forced. Queen a2 forced, take, and we are up a pawn, but it's unlikely that we will be able to win the game, so this is likely going to be a draw. But hey, who wouldn't want with black a pawn up scenario that white might save if they are on a really good day? So yeah, after queen c8, knight c6 wasn't too impressive. Queen d3, not that impressive. Let's have a look at a4, which is the main line of this batch of the sub variations. We are going to hit that knight in the face with knight b4, cb, take on a4. This is slightly counterintuitive at first sight because we weaken a6, but it also once again cranks up the heat on the b file, so it is all fine. We eliminate the knight and we go after the loose pieces. Note that e2 hanging, a4 hanging. This is quite gnarly again, so now we munch all the queenside pawns, and yeah, we have got no problems here whatsoever. Easy equality at the very least. Cool. So that wraps up all the knight cb4 shenanigans. And now we are looking at queen d3. And this is going to be a bit of a wonky variation in the sense that there are a few forced draws here. But again, there are worse things that can happen to us in a game of chess than equalizing easily with black. G6 is our move. We know the drill. F5 can and should wait, and instead we optimize our piece placement. And here both rooks can go to d1, and the variations are confusingly similar. I'm going to start with a to d, queen d7, and at this point, essentially, white doesn't really have, in my opinion, any meaningful ways to fight for an advantage. And if they play queen g3, we have to now slide back to d8 with the queen. Note that bishop h6 would be the most tragic day of the Sveshnikov player. We just slide back to d8, and now the queen on g3 is in fact slightly misplaced. The other line, I think, features queen d3, and here too, queen d3, queen d7 is going to end up in a very, very likely draw. Bishop g4 is a sensible try to eke something out of this position, but not going to happen. Rook b7, and now we are always ready to jump the rook to d7 if need be to cover the d6 pawn. And yeah, taking on e6, we just take back with the pawn. That kills the d5 square. Overall, we have a very healthy position, no problems. If it's the other rook going to d1, then queen d7, and again, queen g3, queen d8 is a potential draw. But here I have two more lines to throw at you, so bear with me before I show you queen d3. It's knight de3 first. White is now trying to utilize the weakness of the d6 pawn, or rather cash in on the weakness of the pawn, but it's easy to defend. So, yeah, no thank you. a4, very logical. We take, they take a6, we kick. If they take the pawn on a4, then we have got all kinds of filthy knight jumps securing the, or rather discovering the attack on the rook. So queen a6 is forced, takes, rook a8, queen d3, rook b8. And we have got a marvelous pile up with the rooks, the Benko Gambit line of the Sicilian Sveshnikov, if you will. Of course, white can capture on d6, but we know that that is not a problem, especially since now it's tactically very good for us. We can actually take b2 and ignore the hanging knight, as bishop takes e3 is going to ensure that we are regaining the lost piece. And with the a pawn, it's only black who has chances for a win. Righto. So yeah, that was knight d to e3, knight c e3. So I just showed you d to e3. Sorry, I'm speaking differently from what I'm doing. I showed you what happens if they attack the pawn on d6. If it's the other knight that steps up, then we can just push a5. This is a typical Sveshnikov plan. Now we are actually looking to push b4 and try to force this pawn to either push or capture, and then we could jump into d4. a4, ba, and now it's b2 that is bleeding again. Knight c4, trying to cover up the weakness. Knight e7, queen g3. Now you need to be careful here. You need to take on d5 with the bishop, ensuring that now we have got time and opportunity to move the bishop. Queen d3 was played in a game. I think it was a correspondence game. Queen c2, rook c5, and yeah, black has no problems. As soon as you see in these mainline Sveshnikovs that the d5 knight has been eliminated and the pawn takes its place, you know that you are doing golden, because the whole line, the entire c3 line, is fundamentally based upon the concept of keeping d5 as an outpost for pieces. So when a pawn pops on d5 in these lines, you know that you've done something really well. And so last but not least, now I'm going back again to queen g3, and once again, this queen d8 is essentially a draw offer. If they go queen d3, we have to go back to d7 and accept our fate. If instead they go knight c b4, then we take, and we play rook b6, and that's the end of this line. The rook on b6 is an excellent defender, covering a6, covering d6, and it's very difficult to see how white would like to make any progress whatsoever in this position. We can send the h-pawn up if we want to, and yeah, sometimes a5, b4 is also an available plan. So if anything, I think I would pick black in this position rather than white. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have covered everything in the bishop e2 line except for its main line with h4. And that is a new motif that we haven't seen yet, and now we need to familiarize ourselves with it. Typically, h4 is best played, in my opinion, in these Sveshnikov lines when the bishop is still back on f6, altogether denying bishop g5. Once the bishop is on g5, you always need to look at h4, but I think that it completely misses the mark. That's my personal opinion in it, but of course, very good players have played it. We refrain from capturing and opening up the h file. We come back to h6, and g4 is the main idea. And again, I am nothing but skeptical about the whole thing. It's a random pawn storm to exploit the awkward placement of the bishop on h6. But after bishop f4, what tends to transpire is that white tries and in fact very often succeeds in hunting down the pawn on f4, but in the interim they end up with a wreck of a position on the king side, the center, and the queen side. And so typically we have got fabulous counterplay for the pawn. Let me demonstrate. Queen d2, knight e5. I mean, what else, right? f3, and we go to bishop e6. Note that f3 was necessary here. And I thought that I had a line for this, because if queen takes f4, then we have this very cool tactical idea of bishop takes g4, and they cannot take on g4 because of knight d3. Hence f3, bishop e6, queen f4, and b4. That is the feisty idea that we need to remember, that just when it looks like white actually has managed to steady the ship, we go like, nah, here comes the pawn thrust, the dreaded pawn thrust. Two captures possible. If knight takes, you just go a5. And b2 is falling, and what that means is that that white king cannot, for the life of it, find a safe haven anywhere on the board. We have got sensational counterplay for the sacrificed pawn. Rook h2 is forced, take, queen f6, and clearly not c4. In this position, our line ends because that's where you end it. It's c3 hanging, f3 hanging, drama wherever you look. It's just problems and drama for white. So the alternative recapture on b4 is cb, and now we are pestering the knight. And again, just when it looks like white has managed to weather the storm, we go, oh, wait for it. I have another aggressive pawn push. And again, we just strike when they the least want to deal with yet another punch. d5, brilliant chess. Now again, there's no time to castle because e4 is under attack. And after ed, we can just simply take d5. And if queen d5, queen c2. And we managed to catch the white king again in the middle. If queen e5, main line, so I will first show you what to do with queen b3. Queen c6, castles, knight g6. The knight is going to jump to f4, and that white king is looking like way too exposed to the mercy of our pieces. And yeah, I'm loving black here. So let's have a look at what happens if they take e5. Rook e8, queen h2, rook b d8, and the best chance for white to not to lose miserably here is to give the piece back immediately. But after rook e2, rook f2, queen f2, rook d2, it is still a game that only one player can win, and that one player is us. The only thing we need to ensure is that no matter where that queen goes, next we play either h6 or h5 to open up the back rank, and then we can feast on the pawns, be annoying with the checks, attack the rook. It is a nightmare for white to play. And with that, we managed to completely cover bishop e2 altogether. And now we are going to move on and have a good look-see at bishop d3. This is a less common variation. Perhaps I should have presented them the opposite order because bishop e2 is a lot more sensible and a lot more frequently played, but it is what it is. We're going to take a look at them anyway, no matter the order. So bishop d3 is up next. Surprise, surprise, bishop g5. Castles is our main line, and no, sorry, h4 is our main line, and so we are looking at castles first. And now I remember, or I understand why I got confused with the h4 lines, because some of those motifs will be seen in this line that I expected in the previous one. So if castles, bishop e6, we know again that this is our ultimate piece layout if allowed. Knight e3, if knight c b4, take, queen c8, surprise, surprise. We have seen this already. The queen is a marvelously placed piece on c8, covering the pawn on a6, potentially threatening with a5. And with the bishop on d3, white doesn't even have a proper look onto d5, so we are doing great here. Knight e3 is the more logical move. Knight e7 again, and again you see why bishop d3 is less optimal. Now d5 is again not sufficiently covered, so bishop c2 has to be played. But now after trade a5, the same old plans of g6, king g7, b4, f5, etc. It just, yeah, is a position where we have so much fun and so much play, and white doesn't. And so, happy days. And with that, we are right on to the main line of bishop d3 with h4, bishop back, and again g4 will be our main one. If knight e3, knight e7. Take, knight d5, queen b7. This is a very typical square to go to with the queen. We step out of all kinds of knight potential attacks on the queen and preparing bishop e6 with the idea of dislodging the knight altogether. And of course, if g4, we always take the f4 square. That's a non-negotiable. Now if take, queen f3, pawn break incoming, not b4, f5. Yay! That's a beautiful pin on the long diagonal. Gf, bishop f, queen f4, bishop e4. Chef's kiss, chess, love and life. And now white needs to be extremely precise to avoid immediate defeat. Queen e4 loses to rook e8. Bishop e4 is only rook f4. Bishop b7, rook b7, and this rook ending is going to be likely a draw. But I would still try to play that for a cheeky win if I could. The problem here with rook be8 is that white has got, what does white have here? Yeah, I can castle out of this. Sorry, I had to think about it on my feet because that's my personal adage to the course. It's not mentioned. And both queens are hanging, so I have to take e4, and then white is actually looking better with taking on d6. So that's why we are taking the queen here. Phew, that was a close one. Saved nicely. All right. So if not knight takes, then it's queen f3, which is another way to round up the bishop, or rather the pawn on f4. The benefit of this move order is that obviously we now can't play f5, so we are instead going to play h5. I don't think that there is, like every time I play a pawn break in this setup, or rather in this Sveshnikov system, I think to myself that, okay, we have done it all. And then there is always a new one. So yeah, that's it, h5. And I'm pretty sure that the idea is that if GH, then we can go f5, because that's how we roll. And that's why they play g5, but that allows bishop g4. Queen g2, b4. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Let's go, pawn sacks. Pawn takes, and bishop back. And now b4 is bleeding. And again, I want you to observe that the pawn march on the king side actually favors us in terms of king safety. So now if the white king goes to king side, that feels quite a vulnerable scenario, whereas our king at home on g8, boy, oh boy, is he a happy lad. Take, and g6. Now, this may look a little bit funky at first sight because we're down a pawn for not a lot, seemingly. But here comes the treasure. After castles, f5. And that is the big deal, folks. That is the big deal. Now, white, in my opinion, is forced to take it. Otherwise, e4, bishop e5, and the ef pawns will absolutely demolish white. And after trade, now our plan is to bring the other big boy to g8, break with g5, and be a royal pest on the king side. And this definitely justifies the material deficit, which is only a pawn, so not a lot anyway. Righto. So, yeah, that was 93, 97. And instead, now we are going to have a look at the immediate g4. Bishop f4. We are learning this motif for sure now. Queen f3. If knight f4, and this is the line, it is very, very similar to the one that we looked at before with the bishop on e2, except here it's even better because we are directly exerting pressure already onto both of these. If I were white here, I would play bishop e2, which ironically would take us back into the bishop e2 line with the tempo down. So I think queen f3 is the smarter way to play it with the bishop on d3, bishop e6, tuck, 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 tuck. And again, this is what I had the flashbacks of, this line, where 95 is a tempo, and now after bishop e2, b4 is going to be quite annoying and powerful. I don't know if there is anything wrong with bishop g4. I don't think there is. But b4 is certainly more annoying in the sense that this is floating the threat of bishop g4 while adding new threats on the queen side. Three responses possible. If knight b4, a5, and this is again almost identical to the bishop e2 line, we have seen this, and we are absolutely golden here. If cb, now we are striking with bishop g4. Booyah! Rook g1, takes, queen c7, and because of the knight is hanging and queen c4 check is on, I think that we are borderline winning here. But at least we are having a heck of an initiative for sure. Last but not least, if the queen slides back to g3, which is to protect c3 and also to step out of the fork on d3, we are going to take. And there is no good recapture here because if queen takes, then g4 hangs. If the pawn takes, then rook b2 penetration is absolutely deadly. So actually b3 is their best move here. But after bishop d7, it's very clear that white is in a world of hurt. We're going to relocate the bishop on c6. And we are now fully ready to break the position up with d5, causing tremendous trouble to white. And that, ladies and gents, is gonna put us back to the tabia of the c3 Sveshnikov, where now we are going to look at the two pawn moves on the wing. First a4 with the intent of hurting us here, and then for h4, or rather at h4, with the intent of denying the bishop's activation on g5. Let's begin with a4. Alrighty, so here we go, a4, and at this point, I feel like we need to channel our inner John McEnroe and go like, you have got to be kidding me, since we did play rook b8 to prevent a4, and now a4 is coming anyway, so it is our moral obligation to prove this wrong. But the move is not as illogical as it may look at first sight, because after ba, white's idea is to play knight b4, thus shielding the b file and the b2 pawn in particular, and allow the queen to have a look-see at the a4 pawn as well. So they would like to get the best of every single world, and once again, we must say, nah. We take b4, and now the recapture can be done by both the pawn and the knight. The pawn is the main idea. Knight takes allows us bishop b4, taking a hot look at the e4 pawn. And indeed, after trading on a6, now it is the b2 pawn that we focus our attention on. And actually, this position is already more convenient for us to play, or better, I should rather say, because the rook on b2 is going to be an absolute menace. And even if white recuperates the a4 pawn, c3 is always going to be weaker than d6. So we are happy here. cb is definitely the idea. We go bishop b7 again. And after rook takes a4, we go to one of our favorite moves that we like to play when the a6 pawn is under attack, and that move is queen c8. And this invites a number of options out of white. Two bishop moves, e2 and d3, and we are also going to look at knight takes f6 as the main idea. Bishop d3 is the weakest link, obviously the same issue as we have seen before. Disconnecting queen and knight means we take, and we play e4, which is another Sveshnikov idea we have seen. Oh man, these pawn pushes, we never get enough. Now, of course, the pawn is immune to capture due to rook e8, and that pin is looking mighty, mighty gnarly. So bishop a6 is forced, and there comes queen f5, castles, and rook e8. And again, we have got the Sveshnikov joy of having d4 against 3 on the king side rolling down. Later on, we might play bishop d8, bishop b6, both to blockade the pawn and to initiate an attack against the f2 pawn. Black has the upper hand. So bishop e2 is an improved version, of course, because now at least the queen can retake on d5. Either is harmless. We go rook b6, defending our a6 pawn, and after castles, queen b7. It's all black who has the play. Rook b4, bishop a6, queen b6, take, take. And again, we are in this typical structure where seemingly both bishops are really bad, but actually our bishop has a lot of potential coming back via d8 again. Queen g4, g6, h4, h5, queen e4, king g7, and we are a lot better with defending rook a2, bishop d8, bishop b6. The whole shebang is there for us, and white is utterly planless. Queen d5, for sure. That was the whole point of playing bishop e2, to keep the queen's vision open to d5. So that's what we are looking at now. But unfortunately, queen c1 incoming. And now if the bishop blocks, we pick off b2, we pick off b4, and we are a pawn to the good. And yeah, there's no way that we're not better here. So this is easy peasy. If instead they block with the queen, we still take b2, we still take b4, and we still claim that there is no way that black could be worse here. Easy peasy. And so knight f6 is our line, and this one is going to be a very long one, actually. Gf back, bishop d3. Obviously, queen d6 here is not playable on account of the check on c1, or rook d8 first even. No, actually, check first. So yeah, bishop d3, it has to be the move. White must develop, and since right now we are not exerting too much pressure, this is the best time to develop. Speaking of exerting pressure, it's time to step up our game a little bit. Here comes d5, the usual central break. We cannot hesitate for a second. Take, and rook d8. Bishop d5 might be well met by various tactical ideas, including bishop h7. So let's just attack that d5 pawn first, and then retake, in fact, with the rook. Now, this is actually a very powerful idea, because now we have got plans of stepping the rook, or rather pushing the rook up to d4, and then swing across to the king side and attack white on g2. Queen b1 is the engine's favorite move here. b5 can be captured, check, take, take, and this endgame can only be good for black. I will show you it's a very long line, but it's good news because it's a good line. Now we are threatening e4, bishop d5, and now we are going to play h5. Rook b to rook h3 can be a problem, so we're going to first ensure that the h-pawn is perfectly safe. And, well, I suppose it's more about, actually, let me rephrase this for you. So it's more about also ensuring that our king gets a bit of fresh air. So now the difference between this and allowing this to come with a check is that we can, at any given time after rook h5, throw in e4 first, and then capture the pawn. And then the three pawns are actually quite annoying. Like, this is by no means something that I would brush off as an all equal material draw. No, it's not the case. The bishop is very passive. The rooks are disjointed. King g6, f5, f4, f5 again, and then an e3 break, creating a passer, is going to be very annoying. In fact, e3 is a pending threat as is because of fe rook takes g2. So do not think for a second that these positions are obvious draws. Not at all. Black still has a lot of play for a win here. And so we are going to look at here the engine's preferred queen b1 hitting h7. But again, it's not really that dangerous. Like, it's not out that our king is going to be in any kind of trouble after losing h7 or giving up h7. Case in point now, rook g4, queen g4 are both quite dangerous threats. So rook a3 is forced, but rook g4 gets there on time. F3 and rook g3 are the two moves. F3 is the main line. If rook g3 we take and we resume the attack of said g2 pawn by playing queen c6, it provokes f3, which in turn opens up the diagonal and allows us, once again, tremendous activity. I really like to observe at times that sometimes, even with extremely limited material, they've got 3 units left, we're still constantly creating problems and dangerous and annoying threats. And that is definitely something that we want to keep in mind. Again, by the way, we are branching here away to two, or rather branching out to 2 different moves, queen c2 and bishop f5. If queen c2, then rook c8. We readjust, and now we attack the queen and the c1 square, so the queen has to slide back. And speaking of c1 square, here we go. Now I think the only move is bishop c2 to prevent the catastrophe on c1, and now we readjust again. The threat is rook d2. And this again is case in point that we constantly keep the pressure up and pester white with various threats, and now it's getting very, very dire. Bishop c4 is a game-winning threat. So b3 is forced, e4. Now ef is a game-winning threat. So f4 is forced, and after queen d4, it's game over. e3 is coming, and it's time to give up the game. Our piece activity reigns supreme again. All right, so let's see what happens if they go bishop f5. In this case, we go in, as we look upon this as an invitation, queen e1, and rook takes b2. King f1, and rook takes b4. And now we didn't quite manage to win the game on the spot due to the pin, but we are going to win this game on account of the extra a pass pawn, which is going to be too much for white to handle. So a big jump back. We are looking at now the main line with f3. Now, it's kind of weird, though, to say that this is the better choice, since rook a3 was clearly played with the intention of swinging across, and f3 kind of shuts this rook out of operation. Nonetheless, at least white doesn't get mated here immediately. But after rook b4, it is crystal clear that we are calling the shots, as the b2 pawn is definitely a delicious target. The queen can come and join the party on c5. It's a balanced position, but I prefer black as usual because it's easier to play this position for black. Okay, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have finished a4, and now we are going to do a full 180 and jump to the other side of the board, and we play h4. Now, a couple of introductory statements about h4. h4 is typically played for 2 reasons, and it's very important that we understand both of the reasons. Number one, the obvious one, is that it prevents our bishop from joining the party on g5. This is the primary idea. However, there is a secondary idea that is often seen in this setup, and that makes the positional line particularly positional. And that idea is that white often wants to play g3 and then step up to h3 with the bishop to trade the light squared bishops. Now, the downside of this operation is that it's very slow, and it's debatable if it achieves enough from white's perspective to justify 3-4 moves spent, plus the weakening of the king side. So that's basically the two sides of the scales. Now, after h4, our move is going to be g6, and probably that some people would go like, whoa, that is like not on, like we just offered the hook for h5. Let me assure you, we are never, ever, ever gonna get mated on the H file for multiple reasons. The number one reason is that it's borderline impossible to get the queen onto the H file, especially since our two bishops cover squares where the queen could go. But more importantly, because even if the queen were to miraculously pop on the H file, all we need is just a rook e8 move to dodge a check on H7, and in the absence of a dark square bishop for white, we cannot get mated here. So don't worry about it. As a matter of fact, h5 is almost always a welcome move from our perspective, because that allows us to step up with the bishop and occupy a much better diagonal. So what's the purpose of g6 then? The purpose is to facilitate bishop g7, to allow this bishop to get out of the way, so to speak, and then after bishop e6, we can either reroute to h6 or play for f5. White now has two main choices. h5 is the one that I really don't think we need to worry about at all, but I'm going to show you how to do this. We go bishop g5, knight e3, and bishop e6. Our usual Sveshnikov setup has been achieved. Three big branches. Bishop e2, queen f3, bishop d3. If bishop e2, knight e7, we continue our fight for the d5 square. Queen d3 and king g7. This is a typical prophylactical move. We prepare to swing across the h file in case it opens up. We cover the s6 square in case the bishop has to abandon its post on g5. And yeah, it's just an overall very handy move. Queen e7, knight d5. I mean, this is the most logical way for white to play, claiming the d5 square. But as we have seen it already many a time, it is not a long-lived victory, as now we are threatening to take on d5 twice, queen g3, and after h6, we have got everything under control. There is no attack on the king side you need to worry about. Bishop takes d5 is a threat, and even if white plays, let's say rook b1, d1 rather, excuse me, we can always consider queenside expansions with a5, b4, or the wilder version, but I don't think it's playable quite yet. Would be bishop takes and an immediate b4. So yeah, rook d1, b4. Oops. My bad. I tricked you and myself with that one too. Okay, so let's see what's cooking here. Love this. The Sveshnikov pawn break. If knight b4, we are going to have a5. And yeah, it's going to be trouble time for white rather, excuse me. So if cb, then bishop d5, and then we check, and then b2 is on. That's game. And if knight takes, then a5. All right. All right. I thought the line ended at rook d1, and nah. We always have you covered, folks. We always have you covered. That even surprised me. Wow, that's a very cool motif. I forgot about this. Loving it. Absolutely loving it. Black is definitely doing great here. Wow. Okay, cool. If instead we go, instead of bishop e2, we go queen f3 first, then again we go king g7. Covering f6 is quite handy. Bishop e2 now. Strange. b4. Bishop c4, trying to utilize the newly available c4 square, but it comes at a cost. a5. And now white has a major dilemma, which is what to do with the king. And note that a5 was not a fixer or upper move of ensuring that a6 is not hanging or b4 is covered. Nuh-uh. We want to send it all the way. Well, not all the way to a2, but all the way to a3. And yeah, White has some issues here with coordinating the army. Okay, finally, the main line is going to be bishop to d3, which, as always, raises the concern of disconnecting queen from the d5 knight, and immediately we set about exploiting it. Now, if bishop c2, then take, and king g7 again, and we have got a very, very handy position. Again, a5, b4 is a plan primarily, and as usual, the white king is a little bit feeling awkward about life at the moment. So, if queen f3 instead after knight e7, we take. That's almost always the situation when there is no piece to retake on d5. We already know this. And now comes one of our favorite pawn breaks. Pawn b4, c4, and king g7. Again, this very handy king move that allows us to play f5 next if need be. And, well, when I say if need be, like f5 is going to hit like a truck. Like there is a need for f5. We merely prepared it. And yeah, so the point of f5 here was that, rather king g7, excuse me, is that after f5, take, queen h3, we can just meet it with rook h8, and white is in a world of hurt. Nice. And that takes us to the end of the h5 variation and back to g3. Honestly, I really dislike this move for white, and I think that the vast majority of players here play g3, which is the right way to play. Bishop g7, and now we have again a split. H5 is better here because now we don't have the king g7 step up, so it's a improved version as far as I'm aware. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, an improved version. So much so that is going to be our main line. But the bishop moves are popular. Bishop g2 allows h5. When not only do we cancel out all kinds of h-pawn moves, but we put bishop g4 on the map as well. And now it's just an easy business for black. Note that by playing bishop g2, white has ruled out an entire minor piece from the fight for the d5 square. And you go like, but coach, g2 is indirectly covering d5. That is true. But what it also means is that the bishop is never going to be able to retake on d5. So now challenging the d5 knight is always going to be an easy operation for us and an easy plan to pursue. And here we are following apparently a title Tuesday game where we are in Yu Yangi's shoes with the black pieces, king h8, stepping out of the diagonal and playing a4. Now, this is as locked up as it can get. And I do think that the position is in some kind of a dynamic balance. Not a lot either side can do. This is not one of the most exciting Sveshnikov positions, but every now and then we get into these types of positions. That being said, the f5 break is still well and truly on the menu, especially after a preparatory queen d7. So I wouldn't rule out any, pawn break yet. But this position is a bit more sterile than most of the ones that we like to play in the Sveshnikov. Bishop h3, in my opinion, is the most logical way to play this g3 setup for white. This is what Duda chose to do against Carlsen, among others. But here too, we have got options. We have got, in fact, two moves here, h5 and bishop b7. Bishop b7 is going to be our main line, but I show you the alternative, which is h5. Take g4. This is quite vicious. Queen takes, pawn takes, and h5. White is hoping to undermine the light squares and recover the g4 pawn. And this is what I would describe as not fun at all. don't do this unless you want nothing more but a draw with black from a position where you actually have to fight for it. So forget about this, in my opinion. We'll leave it in there for you, but I think bishop b7 is the Sveshnikov way to go. h5, and let's begin. b4. Now that is a ticket to the party, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we bring joy for ourselves in this game. Queen d2 is very timid, but I'm going to show you take, and then after knight e7, we are looking absolutely golden, having damaged the white queen side pawn structure. After the standard take, c3 is always going to stick out like a sore thumb, and the passivity of the h8 bishop is completely illusory. In fact, after bishop f6, you already see that it's absolutely the opposite is the truth, because now both bishop g5 and a potential later bishop d8, bishop b6 can be on the cards. Black is clearly better here. No worries. So for sure, they will take back on b4 with the pawn, and now we continue our fight for our favorite d5 square. Knight c3 back. Note that if they play knight e3, we can just go mass captures followed by rook b4, which will hit b2, threaten rook d4, and yeah, white is in a fair bit of pain there. So knight c3 is the best attempt to hang on to the pawn, but of course, once you go back from d5, no, that means trouble, friends. That means trouble. Take, and now both of our bishops are superb, absolutely fantastically placed. And amongst the many moves we can play, bishop e4 may be the cleanest, threatening queen takes d1, and then picking off the knight. Otherwise, the b4 pawn is going to fall, and we have a very healthy position indeed. And with that, bishop h3 is dealt with too, and onto pawn h5, which is the main idea. And as I said earlier, this is a lot smarter timing of h5 than earlier on when the bishop was still out on f6. Knight e7. And now again, we have knight e3 and knight b4. Knight b4 is a sub variation. Here we can play bishop b7. If queen d3, then a5. This is a typical Sveshnikov motif of making these knights make up their mind. And now after the masses of takes, we have rook c8, which threatens rook c5 as well as b4. And the position is in balance. Rook d1, rook c5. We have seen this before. Don't be afraid to lose the d6 pawn. You are going to get plenty of play. This is one of my favorite lines to demonstrate the latent potential of the f8 bishop. It almost feels like I'm speaking against myself because we just put yet another pawn on black, but wait for it. We now put it on white, or we will soon with b3. But yeah, after bishop f8, I thought that this was one of those lines where we go b3, bishop c5, and bishop d4, which I think we could do here too, by the way. But watch as it unfolds. So bishop d8, rook a6. I will remove the arrows. Rook c8. And what we want to do now is to trade off the a6 rook, and then bishop c5, bishop d4 is going to secure a very easy equality, hands down. So, for example, if they go bishop e2, we go rook c6, and we can always repeat. So they will ultimately have to take, and that allows this bishop into d4, and that is definitely going to be plenty of compensation for the pawn. For starters, white can no longer penetrate into our position at all. And if they play b3 and we feel very cheeky, we can play for a4, take, and then infiltrate with the rook and try to pick on the pawn or utilize the second rank. But at least equality is guaranteed. No worries. So, yeah, that was queen d3. If instead white goes hg6 right away, we have got hg back, of course. Queen b3 might be a slightly smarter plan than putting it on d3, as it keeps the bishop's diagonal open as well. But our response is identical. We go a5. Takes. 95, takes, and rook fc8. Again, we know the drill. Note that bishop b5, of course, is not hanging on account of rook c5. So that would be an ouchie. Instead, rook d1 again. And instead, sorry, not instead, but again, we are entering the same territory, b4, c4, bishop f8, rook d7. And here comes the idea that I thought was going to come in the previous line. B3 indeed. This is the move, folks. This is the move. And this is the presentation or demonstration of the power of the f8 bishop. Look at that absolute beast. Ay, 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 ay. King d2, rook check, eliminating white's only active piece. And after take, bishop c5, despite the material deficit, I prefer black. I mean, I'm sure that white is in no trouble, but of losing the game with perfect defense. But there's no way anyone would pick white here, that's for sure. King g7, rook h8, penetrate on the h file, or you can simply walk your king all the way to c5. I'm loving life here. For sure. Yeah, and with that, now we're going to move on to the main line, which is knight c to e3 instead of going to b4. We take. Now, queen takes is nonsense because we just score a fat tempo on the queen and then we break with f5. And this is a Sveshnikov dream. Rook c5 incoming. White is almost certainly losing the battle for the d5 square. So for sure, knight d5. That's why the knight went to e3 in the first place. Bishop b7. Now with queen d3, there comes a little surprise. We go back to f6 in order to go back to g5. And this is why it was smart by white to delay h5, because now we lose tempi, on rerouting the bishop. The good news is that we can afford it. And this is what I told you earlier, that yes, it looks like a decent plan for white to play out these h4, g3, occasionally h5 moves, but they're not exactly the types of moves that damage us. And so we can afford some tempi in order to optimize our piece placement. And yeah, we just, again, go into this thematic opposite colored bishop scenario where king g7 will be played, and ultimately we can trade queens on queen a8. We can play for b4. What is certain is that our position is clearly not worse. In fact, quite fine. So, bishop e2. That is the main move. And again, bishop f6, headed back to g5, our main operation, queen d3, bishop g5, and two lines here on offer. If rook d1, rook c8. This is almost always played with the intent of dropping the rook on c5 and challenging the d5 square or d5 knight, if you will. Rook c5 indeed, and now the knight has to retreat. And as usual, that's my mantra, when the d5 outpost, or rather its occupant, is dispatched from the square, it's almost always bad news for white. A5, now we are simply looking to push those pawns up on the queen side and gain some space. Note that d6 is not worrying us at all. Like queen takes d6, he looks outright horrid on account of take, and a3. Which is why a3 by white is needed. And now we break with d5. This is a temporary pawn sack, but one that we are more than happy to make, because after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, queen d6, a subsequent f5, e4 may actually allow us a slightly better position. And f5, e4 also means that the d5 pawn is very likely going to be recovered. So, yeah, on paper, we're down a pawn. In reality, white has a very difficult position to play because there is nothing to play for, and f5, e4 is coming. So main line, folks, a3 right away instead of rook d1. Very similar in essence, king g7, rook d1, and again, rook c8, rook c5 is our modus operandi. Some people call it operandi, but I don't think it's right. So we'll stick with operandi, the way we operate. 93, and queen e7. Same old, same old. The d6 pawn is not capturable now on account of the hanging e4 pawn as well. And after knight d5, queen d8, we can be very proud of ourselves for equalizing, and we can be a teeny bit upset about the fact that a perpetual attack is on the cards with knight e3, queen d8, queen e7, knight d5, queen d8, etc. And we repeat moves and we walk away with a draw. But worse things happened in life than scoring a draw with black. And as you could see, the way to get to this position was paved with a lot of fun and a lot of exciting variations, even in this very positional treatment of this variation with c3. Speaking of which, this concludes the c3 variation, friends. And now we are going to look at another fairly positional and at times rather rigid structure, which is going to be introduced by White's c4 move instead of c3 all the way back to here. So c4 is going to be the subject of our next chapter. So let's get on with that.